Hello everyone, my name is Purvaja, and today I want to share a story not just about pollution but about people, about progress that poisoned. I'm going to talk about lead poisoning in Haina. Now, before we dive in, here's a quick roadmap of what we'll cover today. First, we'll look at the background of Haina's lead exposure. Next, we'll examine the human health impact, especially on children, with data that reveals the true scale of the crisis. Then we'll explore the environmental contamination and looking how widespread it was. We'll also take a before and after look, comparing conditions prior to cleanup efforts and what's changed since. And finally, we'll bring it all together with a summary that reflects on what Haina's story teaches us. Well, welcome to Haina, Dominican Republic, the town once called the Dominican Chernobyl, and about a small Dominican town that became one of the most toxic places on earth. Located just outside Santo Domingo, Bajos de Haina is home to over 120,000 residents. It's a vibrant industrial hub, housing our refineries, manufacturing plants, and until recently, a used lead acid battery smelter. Before the pollution, this was a town like many others, hardworking people, children playing in the streets, a community full of color, music, and resilience. But this community had no idea that their air, soil, and even their homes were being laced with lead. Now let's zoom in to understand exactly how this environmental disaster unfolded. What you're looking at here is a map of Haina with the metaloxyl lead acid battery recycling plant, the source of the town's widespread contamination. This factory was situated right next to densely populated residential areas. There was no buffer zone, no environmental safeguards. Batteries, often imported from the US, were broken apart in the open. Acid drained into open pits. The lead components were melted down using rudimentary and unsafe techniques. But here's the scary part: airborne lead dust spread through nearby neighborhoods, then washed into drainage channels during rain, contaminating water and soil. Wastes like slag and battery casings were dumped in open areas. Lead settled in the topsoil where kids played and food was grown. Every pollution pathway, air, soil, water, food, was breached. Let's talk about lead, one of the most insidious toxins known to public health. It doesn't belong in the human body at any level. It targets the brain, damages organs, and in children, it hijacks their future. Cognitive impairment, behavioral disorders, lower IQ, these are not theoretical risks. These are realities for the children of Haina. What Metaloxa was doing wasn't just risky. These industries are often located in low income countries where regulation is lax and human life is treated as a cost, not a value. Now, in 1997, a study by the Dominican Secretary of Health and the Blacksmith Institute measured blood lead levels in children living near the metaloxa site. The CDC's threshold for concern is 5 micrograms per deciliter, just 5. But the blood lead levels in children living near the metaloxa site average 71 micrograms per deciliter. Let me say that again, 71. It is one of the highest recorded and one of the worst environmental health crises ever documented in the Western Hemisphere. And these were toddlers with developmental delays, school aged children with seizures, and entire families unable to understand why their kids were sick. Every child we tested was contaminated. That code comes from Dr. Jack Caravanaz, a leading environmental scientist. Reports from Pure Earth and Human Rights Watch highlighted not only the environmental danger, but the inequity. This wouldn't have happened in a wealthy area, but Haina was disposable to decision makers. It's important to understand where it came from. The biggest contributor by far was the metaloxa plant, responsible for nearly 70% of the pollution. Other 20% came from scattered battery waste, abandoned or improperly disposed. And finally, about 10% came from vehicle emissions, especially from older vehicles. Eventually, after years of international pressure and devastating headlines, something changed. In 2008, a remediation effort was launched led by Pure Earth in collaboration with the Dominican government. Over 6,000 cubic meters of lead contaminated soil was removed. That's the equivalent of nearly 2.5 Olympic swimming pools filled with poison. Streets were resurfaced, new topsoil was brought in, and greenery planted to absorb residual toxins. Blood levels dropped by 30 to 50% in the treated areas. For a moment, it seemed like a victory, but here's the reality check. The cleanup was partial. Many residential zones and open spaces were left untreated. There was no systematic follow up, no long term public health support, no comprehensive medical care for the children who had already suffered irreversible damage. Imagining poisoning an entire generation, then planting some grass and walking away. That's exactly what happened in Haina. Now, children around the community had average lead levels of 70 micrograms per deciliter. For perspective, again, CDC action level is 5. That means these kids weren't just exposed, they were catastrophically poisoned. But then, after the global attention mounted and public pressure intensified, the factory was finally shut down, and look what happened. The blood lead levels plummeted. In this slide, we are looking at soil lead levels at a formal battery recycling site. The colored circles represent lead concentrations in surface soil measured in parts per million. The larger and darker the circle, the higher the concentration of lead. You'll notice that the biggest red circles are clustered inside the green shaded area. This marks the legacy contamination zone, the heart of the old battery smelting operation. There's also an excavated ravine area within the zone, indicating a concentrated hotspot where remediation efforts may have begun. Smaller blue circles around the perimeter show the lead levels found just outside the main contaminated zone. Although lower than the center, many of these still exceed safe levels. And sometimes 5 months can change a lifetime, or at least begin to. This graph shows us the lead levels in Haina's children measured just 5 months apart, March and August of 1997. In March 1997, lead levels were catastrophically high, but by August, we see a noticeable drop, still dangerously high, but moving to the right direction. Why? Because the battery smelting plant had been shut down and the community had begun to organize. Well, to summarize all this, Haina is no longer just a place, it's a symbol. Today, Haina stands on the global map not for its rich culture or growing industry, but because of the environmental injustice. Thousands of children were poisoned, many of them permanently. And it's a pattern we have seen before. It's one we must finally break. The cleanup, it came too late, and the policies that allowed this to happen, they still haven't changed. This wasn't just a failure of response, it was failure of responsibility. As the WHO put it, it's cheaper to prevent exposure than to treat its consequences, but prevention isn't profitable. So we ask, who pays the price when prevention isn't prioritized? In Haina, it was the children. Well, these are the references. Thank you for your time.